Uh, Brilliant. So yeah, massive thank you to everyone and welcome to our professional learning series. We couldn't be more delighted to have Dr. Tom Harrison from the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtue at the University of Birmingham with us tonight, and talking about such an incredibly important topic. I've known Tom for a long time and I've always really admired his research into character and felt that it was unbelievably important for all of the young people that I'm privileged enough to work with, but also certainly to my own family. So I was extremely excited when he wrote his most recent book, which he's going to tell you all about. And I love the title as well, Thrive. I think that is such a brilliant way to start a book. So even in a digital world, how are we enabling the young people that we get to work with and our families to thrive in amongst the challenges of the internet, computer games, and social media? Yeah, Tom's been researching in this area for many years, at least 10 very seriously. And I've loved all of the papers that he's written on this, and there are many. You can find them all on the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues website, so do have a look there, and please do order his book. It is absolutely superb, and hopefully you'll get a real insight into it. The plan for this evening, Tom's going to give us some opening comments, and then I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then we'll ask you if you'd like to ask Tom any questions. So Tom, over to you. Just a massive thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie, and to everyone at Wellington and everyone around for the schools within your partnership for offering or inviting me this opportunity to present. I'll say a few health warnings just to start with. Health warning number one is this is a popular time for Wi-Fi in our household, being 8 o'clock and having two children and a wife who's all watching telly in various different rooms right now. So fingers crossed the Wi-Fi holds up. I've got some emergency backup system here if it all goes wrong. Health warning number two is this beautiful light next to me, which I'll try to get the lighting right, was made by my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter. I'll talk a little bit about because she's the star of the book, but it was flickering quite a lot a minute ago. So if we suddenly go into full darkness, blame her CDT or design technology teacher or for the bulb that's in that one. But hopefully that is going to stay with us. And then health warning number three, I have to say this for me. I'm an early morning riser. Normally my brain is fantastic. I would say about 6:30 in the morning. 8:15, just hoping that some sense comes out of my mouth over the next 45 minutes, and the questions aren't too testing as we clock towards 9 o'clock, because we'll just have to see whether the brain holds up for that long. But with those health warnings aside, as I say, I'm really delighted to get this opportunity to speak to you and everyone who's watching this in the video afterwards as well. As Kate says, what I want to do is just spend like 5 or 6 minutes just at the beginning, just setting the scene for this area of talking about character and virtue in the digital world, and then, as I say, really looking forward to answering Katie's and indeed any questions that you might have afterwards about the book, or indeed about any of the research that myself or colleagues at the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues are undertaking, looking at the place of character in society, whether that be in schools, community settings, voluntary settings, etc. So the book itself, in fact, I can just reach up here and grab one. Obviously, I've got quite a few handy copies just up there. Is the centerpiece of this talk. This is my book, Thrive. It's called How to Cultivate Character So Your Children Can Flourish Online. And I suppose why did I write the book? Well, I actually did my PhD in this topic. I looked at what the influence of the internet was on 10 to 14-year-olds. Sorry, 12 to 16-year-olds, forgot the age, at that age group. I did that, commenced it probably about 10 years ago, and got got my doctorate about 8 years ago or 6 years ago on this topic. But what I felt when I left that was that I knew a huge amount theoretically, and I'd also come up with some fairly interesting, or what I thought were interesting, empirical findings. But when my daughter first got her smartphone, which is when she left school, primary school, about 3 years ago, I really didn't feel I knew anything that I actually needed to do practically in terms of helping her manage what was incredibly powerful technology that we'd just given her. I was very, very aware through my own research and obviously the daily newspaper headlines and media stories, etc., about the great deal of opportunities technology affords young people, but also about all the risks. And I felt that without really starting to see the world through her eyes and starting to think about what, a practical, turning this theory and this empirical research, mine and others, into kind of more practical, hopefully advice, was necessary. And so it's partly selfish writing the book in terms of just trying to get myself a sense of what I needed to do. But I hope some of the ideas and thoughts I put in there are helpful for this book's primarily for parents, but there's quite a lot that it says to teachers, particularly the end chapters have got quite a lot of activities that would work in schools as well. I have actually got a book I'm writing with a couple of teachers right now, which will be out next year, provisionally entitled Future Proof, which is mainly for teachers, and it's all about a new approach to digital citizenship education, a whole school approach to digital citizenship education, given all the problematics of trying to deal with preparing young people not only for current lives living in a digital world, but also kind of future lives with all the new technologies and everything coming forward. And in that book, I kind of envisage how you might take a whole school approach to digital citizenship education that helps children deal with the risks, but also make the most of the opportunities coming their way through the digital world. So that's more of a school book. This one's a bit more for parents, but obviously has quite a lot on teachers as well. And I just want to say a couple of things about the theoretical approach before mentioning something about the practice, because I say the book's very practical, but it's actually very much based on theoretical approach and is a character-based theoretical approach. What I found in my research, and others have backed this up quite a lot, is that quite often we try to manage situation in our children's lives through implementing rules, through regulations, what might be called a deontological approach. And there's a huge amount of challenges by doing that. I just know myself I've certainly put in place rules for my daughter when she first got a phone about when she could and couldn't have it, whether she could have it in a bedroom. We put settings on the Wi-Fi to stop her accessing particular things. But we know that so many children get round rules, but it's also very difficult to put rules in place in the cyber world due to certain affordances. Children operate anonymously. They can your Wi-Fi may stop things, but they can pick it up somewhere else. Teachers would find it very hard to. Obviously, teachers a lot of the time really struggle to know how to manage the rules of stopping phones being in the classroom, and children still find their ways around there. There's been reports about children getting so-called burner phones, almost what criminals would have, spare phones that their parents or teachers don't actually know about. So there's certain affordances that the digital environment, that means that actually having rules in that place that are really enforceable and work all the time it makes it challenging. Likewise, we try to educate, particularly morally, a lot of the time by trying to get children to think about the consequences of their actions, trying to weigh up and work out what would be the right thing to do and think about the consequence of them, a more utilitarian or consequentialist approach. But again, that's particularly problematic in the digital world. We just need to think about how many people we know or been in the newspaper who've sent things online and then been caught out years later for what they've actually put on their Twitter feed or their social media feed. We know that one text message that a child may send or an image that a child may send to one of their friends innocently is suddenly being passed around the whole of the school, or everyone sees it, etc. It's really hard for any of us to sometimes understand the consequences of our digital actions, and so trying to work out what the right thing to do is often difficult in that utilitarian sense. So that's why I'm particularly attracted to a character-based approach, because the character-based approach doesn't suggest we're always going to get things right. it's not an over moralizing approach in terms of, just, indoctrinating children to be kind of honest or compassionate or whatever it may be. What a virtue ethical character based approach is about trying to cultivate qualities in children and young people, indeed all of us, that would help them make better decisions more of the time. So that's accepting. It's very much about experiential and living in the real world. It's very much about understanding that all of us sometimes don't make errors, but the hope is that we try and reflect on them and maybe make better decisions next time. And at the heart of this book is my attempt to try and show you how you might help children develop what I call cyber wisdom, coming from the Greek term phronesis, or practical wisdom, which is about when there's situations that children, or indeed any of us, are faced with, trying to, and there's many moral situations that children face in the digital worlds today, what sort of strategies you can help them to make better decisions, particularly when, for example, all the virtues or qualities clash, or they're having to decide between different courses of action. I don't try and suggest that cultivating that quality is in any way simple, and it's a lifelong journey, and many of us won't ever kind of be fully from on eames, as they call it, or kind of fully wise, cyber wise in the context of my writing and this research in the book. But I do think that we can put things in place that would help children get closer to, or more likely to make better decisions in these sorts of instances. And the primary reason for that is because, in the absence of rules and in the problematics of consequences, but that's one of the attractions character, but also children are going to leave the homes, they're going to leave schools, and they're ultimately, where there isn't going to be people around there necessarily kind of supporting them or helping them around these decisions. They've got to make those decisions themselves. A lot of the time they're making them through the night anyway, if parents allowing their children to have phones on in their bedroom through the night. Quite often they're operating in very unsupervised circumstances anyway, but certainly characters are much more long-term focus for personal development, because it's who we are when no one is watching, or no one is actually kind of checking in on what's actually going. So the main arc of the book tries to show, I very much, one of the chapters is on the rules. I'm not suggesting we don't need rules. Clearly it would be very remiss, I think, of any parent or school not to have rules around this stuff. It's very much a place, but I suggest they're the foundations on which a character cyber wisdom based approach can actually be built. And I say within the book, I give some different strategies and approaches around how that might actually work. So that's the kind of core central kind of focus of the book, is to talk through that kind of theoretical approach initially, and then get into two different models, which I think Katy might get onto in her questions. But I give a model for parents, which is why the book's called Thrive, because that's about the different sorts of qualities that we'd hope that parents would be able to show to help their children develop kind of wisdom or character to be able to really flourish in a digital world. And then I also give a model for children, which is sort of qualities that so I've got it the wrong way around. I've got my book. The React model is actually the model for parents, about their qualities. So the R of React, for example, is be a rule maker. As I said, you do want it to be a rule maker. The E is about being an exemplar. The A is about being an advisor. The C is for kind of being a character champion. And the T's of the React model is for Thrive, because Thrive is hopefully what children will be if you install those different, or parents in those sorts of ways. But the T also stands for the Thrive model, which is the one with the qualities that I think we need to particularly focus on in helping our children develop for the digital world. Those are those different qualities that I'll be able to come on to in question. I can talk you through those and what those may look like. So yeah, in summary, this sounds on reflection right now, I'm trying to make a massive sales pitch for my book. I'm not trying to make a sales pitch for my book. What I am hoping that you'll do is being interested in my suggested approaches towards a character-based focus and to help children kind of really flourish in the digital age. And I also as I say, hope I can encourage you to think about some of the other research that we're doing at the Jubilee Centre, both in this area. So, for example, right now we're running a controlled trial for lesson plan, trying to cultivate different components of cyber wisdom that we think will help children make better decisions. We're trialling that right now. We're looking for schools to take part in that, secondary schools to take part in that trial if people are interested as well. So we've done different models around, kind of both cyber wisdom, but also more broadly phronesis or practical wisdom that we're turning into activities that schools can use in classrooms as well. So to finish with a bit of a sales pitch for the Jubilee Centre and all the free research materials and publicity that you can actually find on there. So I'll conclude there, Katie, because I think I've spoken probably for longer than I intended to from the outset, but hopefully I've given a little bit of food for thought for further questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, such exciting and important research and brilliant opening comments as well. I'd absolutely love to hear more about React and Thrive. And so if you could possibly, tell us a bit more about kind of React. You said that it's rules, you want to be the exemplar, you want to be the advisor, the character champion to enable the thriving. But maybe if you could start with rules, because we do need rules. You said we need rules, but how do we set those rules, and do we need consequences, or what did your research point to? Have you got any advice for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that I think all parents and also teachers are struggling with. I know my daughter's school, they've just sent home a whole email saying, look, we basically had to rip up all our policy on mobile phones in schools previously, and we're starting again because they in effect just said that they didn't really get it right the first time around. They tried to be much more liberal about the use of phones. They certainly didn't have them in the classroom unless they were used for learning purposes, but I think it's just kind of got quite lax around the kind of different kind of school in that sort of area. So we're all struggling with it, whether it be in a home or whether it actually be in the kind of school environment, to think about where's the right place to set these rules. Because in a way we understand that as much as there's so many risks and problems with these technologies, they also offer a great deal of opportunity. And also we don't really want to be putting our children or getting our children so scared about them or kind of their use or whatever that actually they miss out in the opportunities that come from, so much of citizenship comes through actually digital ways right now, how we access, how we find out things, how we participate, how we have our voice heard, etc., comes through that. Learning, we found through the pandemic, so much learning had to move online, and technologies were in many ways, the internet was the unsung hero of the pandemic and allowed us to do that. Connections that we make globally for big global important questions are done through digital technologies. So there's so many opportunities and positives. So we don't want to be, I'm not someone who wants to be kind of saying, right, we need to shut all this stuff down, we can't have it. But we've just got to, and we're learning so quickly, and the technology is changing so quickly, and it's like, whack-a-mole, one app goes away and another one pops up, and we still haven't worked out what's going on with that. So there's so many problems for us trying to set rules, and what is the right rule and the right amount, and how do you actually, set them to, and because our children are clever, and they're probably cleverer than us in many ways around how these technologies work. So, as soon as you try and put in one block, they may find another way around it, or there's different approaches, or what your rule in one house may be different and mates, etc. So rules are there because they provide some boundaries, and if nothing else, they tell children that this stuff needs to be used wisely and needs to be used carefully, and we've got to think about when it is. And there are lots of wellbeing issues if we don't often put phones, rules in place. If our kids are using phones throughout the night the whole time, not only that's going to have issues for sleep, but it's also going to have potential issues for what's that communication going on. Is it is they getting into kind of sorts of issues and troubles that they'd never be getting into before the phone existed, because they'd be at home and not having those sorts of communication. So what I suggest in the book, and I give a number of examples of the rules you might put in place, but I say that they're both limited and limited, basically. So they will limit, because if you only have rules, i.e. ban all the phones, then they're actually going to be limiting in terms of our children learning that technology, which isn't going to go away. And they're limited for all the reasons that I've just said, because they only get you so far. And that's why I like this idea of them being the foundations for which a more character-based approach can be built upon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. I think that's so true. I'd love to ask a follow-up question. So what about when young people get it wrong from a character point of view? So what about when they do steal their phone back and you find them with their phone at midnight, or you know that they've been on a site that you really didn't want them to be on? What then? What would you recommend from your research?
Yeah, you're asking very pertinent questions, because it's not just from my research, it's from my day-to-day life, life in terms of those sorts of dilemmas and debates about how to do it. And I'll be the first to say, and although I'm supposedly an expert in this area, I get it wrong quite a lot. I'm a parent myself. I'm learning through the experience of trying to work out, because these are human questions and human dilemmas, that there isn't always kind of right or wrong answers. You're just trying to negotiate and through this messy world and work out what's the best way to understand them, and kind of progress. So I think there's a certain amount of trial and error in this, and I think that's what attracted to kind of as I say, a virtue ethical character based approach, because it is understanding that it's about experiential learning, it's about reflection, it's about trying to kind of develop wisdom over time, sometimes getting right, sometimes getting it wrong, and it understands that situations change, and we have to learn through those. So in many ways it is more future proof than things such as rules, because even if the technology changes, the sorts of character qualities that we want and we hold dear are still important. We still think it's important to be compassionate and kind and courageous. Most of the time through society, those have been the sorts of qualities that have shined through. So it's hard to make rules for what's going to happen in the future, but we still think these qualities are important. So I think that's, when you're in those sorts of situations with children pushing at the edges. I mean, just think of the vilification sometimes of people who become famous based on a Twitter, and then something's come out from what they did on Twitter like 10 years earlier. I'd like to think that we should kind of have some understanding around there, because in many ways it's difficult for us to be overly moralizing of our children when they've been given quite an unfair playground, with lots of ethical kind of challenges and obstacles to play in. And the adults who've largely created a lot of this technology haven't exactly always proven to be the best moral exemplars in that space themselves. So I think we've got to be somewhat understanding of our children and trying to negotiate that space. And, the A of the model is actually about being an advisor. And I say being an advisor because, and that's a carefully chosen word, because in many ways we're not an expert as parents, because we actually don't know a lot of these apps or a lot of these technologies. But what we do know is, because we've lived quite a lot of life, is that how dilemmas that may happen in the digital space have probably got parallels and happened in other bits of space, and we can help our children in that space, because we still know what roughly it looks like to be compassionate or generous or human or humble or resilient or whatever it may be in different spheres, and we can bring that in to that digital element, even if we don't fully understand the tech chat or the app or whatever they're using at that space. So in many ways what I'm proposing is a partnership, where you both got some expertise and you're trying to work through this together in conversation.
And that sounds so brilliant for relationships, which we all know are so fundamental to flourishing as well. And it's so difficult to learn, isn't it, in a kind of dysfunctional relationship? So I guess the more that we can prioritize relationships, the better, even when it's something as challenging and as contentious, certainly in our house, as tech use. And in our case, it's video games, but I'm sure it's different in different houses. I love the idea of parents being, or teachers being, character champions. Could you tell us a bit more about that? What would you advise to enable us to do that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I use in the book, it draws on the much wider work that Jubilee Centre and also many other great centres around the world have actually done, looking at the importance of character in society. So I focus a lot on kind of more common or more tried and tested, particularly in recent years, approaches to character education, and then adapt them for the kind of the digital age. So a lot of the heart of character is actually around this idea of kind of dealing with dilemmas or dealing with kind of daily situations where we're having to choose what is the right option. So I show in the book some examples, different sorts of dilemmas and activities around them, and how children can kind of work through in different teaching activities, you know, what they might do and the decisions they might make in different sorts of places. I talk a lot about kind of exemplars and the importance of us as exemplars in this space. You know, my kids are the first to pick up, particularly since I've written a book on this stuff, if I'm doing stuff that perhaps I've, you know, suggested that they do differently, so they, you know, they see that challenge straight away. So I talk a lot about the importance of teachers and parents as exemplars, and in this space as kind of character exemplars. We within the program we're using, the Cultivating Cyber Wisdom program I was talking about in schools, we're using narratives quite a lot, stories. That's about cultivating a literacy or a language around character, which helps all of us, but certainly pupils and students, understand that that this stuff matters, but also start to understand some of the key concepts and words, so they can start to use that in their own lives and reflect on it and think through those sorts of lenses as well. We use lots of kind of video clips and those sort of, you know, digital tools. What I'm particularly excited about right now, and it's only just emerging, is how digital tech can actually be useful for character education in itself. I talk about a program I'm supporting actually in Nigeria, where they're using VR to get a different kind of people, students living in different sorts of tribes where there's often conflict, to understand their different perspectives and kind of go inside their lives and cultivate qualities such as empathy and kind of compassion in those sorts of ways. So I think there's some exciting stuff coming through where tech may actually be, you know, it being used more within character education in those sorts of spaces. So yeah, lots of the stuff that I talk about within character in the book, apart from the fact that I'm talking about particular virtues or qualities that we hope our children will develop, but also draws a lot from the literature and the research on practice, character education practice, and what actually works in those sorts of spaces.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. What a cool piece of research. And yeah, really brilliant. I think that would be so valuable for so many of us to really get into the kind of shoes of other people and really understand what's going on for them. And I guess it applies to our young people in their digital world. So I guess, you know, the more we can get into their shoes, as you're helping these tribes to do, and understand what it's like from their perspective, I guess the better as well. Oh, brilliant. And now we've got about 15 minutes left, so I'd love to invite our audience to ask any questions that they'd like to. So you can either just turn your cameras on and ask a question, or type one in the chat, and then I can invite you to speak. Otherwise I can keep going, because I've got loads more to ask you. I should give everyone a couple of seconds. I'm just going to re-plug in as well. And let everyone think for 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Oh, I think we might just carry on, Tom. I think they seem happy with our line of questioning, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Happy for me to ask you another one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, as long as
Brilliant.
the answer seems to be coming across all right, I'm very happy.
Totally. So your last part of the model is thrive. Could you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, I love the word thrive, but what does it mean for you in your writing and research?
Yeah, I mean, I could be accused slightly of trying to kind of force out an idea just because an acronym seems to work quite nicely. But when I've, you know, in education, and particularly when you write more practice books, you know, having some sort of models or acronyms are good ways to kind of help people remember what's going on. So there was some sort of forcing this stuff in there. But when I actually started to play around with it, and the sorts of terms that, you know, were coming through in the research and my own kind of understanding of, you know, bringing children up in this world, these were the sorts of qualities that really kind of shine through as being important. And I'll just run through the the qualities linked to the actual Thrive model. So the first quality is about being thoughtful, and it's actually kind of thoughtful in two different ways. It's thoughtful as in compassion, because actually so many of the issues of our children face online right now are issues around kind of compassion. It's linked to kind of bullying, abuse, sexting, these sorts of areas, which are often about not actually being kind of caring and compassion for our fellow users on the internet and that sort of space. So thoughtful for that sense, but actually there's also thoughtful with a kind of full of thoughts type thing, because what really matters is also about being reflective and kind of thinking, as I've already said, kind of thinking through our actions and reflecting them. So there's kind of two senses of thoughtful there. The H stood for being human, and it was kind of just a reminder that often that we can lose so much of ourselves to technology. I tell the story at the start of how I always used to, when I used to get lost in the car the whole time, the first thing I'd always do is wind down the window and start chatting to the people and say, where am I? And then you kind of get in touch with what's going on in that space. You feel it. Now you just blindly follow your sat nav wherever you go, and you drive through things, and you're just letting the technology guide you. And in a way, we kind of, even seemingly not meaning to, sometimes can lose touch with that human connection. And I use lots of examples of that. I talk a lot about trying to get our children to record their kind of experiences online much more qualitatively rather than quantitatively. It's often how much likes you can get, or how many kind of followers you can get, and all the rest of it. But actually the meaning comes in the qualitative of the relationships. It's the bits behind them, it's the actual messages that you're coming through and the meaning that's within those. So a lot of kind of tips around kind of being human. I talk about being reasonable. So that was probably the most forced ones of the letters, but so much of the being a character-based approach is actually moral reasoning, and so being able to kind of reason through the different sorts of dilemmas that you face online. I give lots of examples of how you can help children think through the situations they face and reason through what is the right sorts of answers they make. The I's around integrity. I talk about integrity more than honesty. A lot of online issues are around honesty. They are about mistrust, plagiarism, fake news. All of these sorts of topics tend to be around honesty. But actually, honesty tends to be kind of the short term, kind of doing the right, honest thing in each situation. I talk about integrity as being a much longer journey. We often call people that they've got integrity when they're kind of true to their values through the course of their life. And in a way, because digital legacies are so important, because what we say 10 years ago comes back to hit us now, is about trying to be true to those values all the way through your life and keeping hold of them. The V is for kind of being virtuous, and that's kind of picking up all the other qualities of character that are important, whether it be resilience, whether it be humility, etc. And I connect a lot of those virtues to some of the main challenges or obstacles in our children's lives around there. And then it ends with the E, which is being an exemplar again. And it's exemplar is actually also in the React model as well, the E, the React, the parents model as well. But the reason the exemplar is in Thrive, or the last one, because it's almost a virtuous circle. Because if you've got children who are showing all these qualities that you hope you'll show, then that's how the future's hopefully going to be brighter in this space. Because those children that we're educating right now are going to be the ones who are going to become the parents, who are going to become the educators, who are going to become the tech developers, etc. And hopefully, if they understand the importance of these kind of character qualities in this digital space, they will think through those when they actually end up in those roles, and they'll be exemplifying them in those sorts of roles as well.
Brilliant. I love that model, and so much fantastic stuff in that. I'm really curious, how do you kind of convince young people that they want to be virtuous and that they want to be the exemplars for the future?
Yeah, I mean that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, if you could do it, if you knew the answer to some extent, the world would probably be a much better place. But I suppose the issue I take with the word convince is, in a way, when my approach isn't, or any of the Jubilee Centre and the virtue ethic approach wouldn't be around trying to convince, because you end up getting into a very behaviouristic model if you start using words like convince, etc. Because it's kind of saying, these are the right virtues, and it's not so much about the virtues which we kind of understand are broadly right, but it's about how you show them. And if we're constantly just telling our children exactly how to behave in each situation, that's not actually true character. That's a form of behaviorism, because you're basically guiding them or telling them what they need to do in every single situation. What we're trying to do is, in a very complex way, and as I've already said, in a way that we don't always get things right or wrong, is try to provide an environment, a culture, an ethos, a setting that encourages children to think through these issues in their own sense, and then come to terms with what they think is a better thing for themselves, but also more broadly for society in those spaces. There's well-known kind of moral dips, for example, in teenage years, where where that you may be not feeling like you're doing very well in this sort of space, or setting up the culture of the family ethos that you're hoping to in that thing, but then these children come out of those, which suggests that what you've done in the early years and the groundings around that is actually going to have some strength. So a lot of the approaches are, we do suggest some more kind of what might be called explicit approaches to character education, stuff that you would actually do in the classroom, much more focused, maybe even calling it that as a subtopic and subject. But none of that is about, fixing the kids or telling them how to behave, or certainly not having a lesson on honesty and kind of hoping 40 minutes later the kids are all kind of honest. It's more about what you're doing explicitly to help children think, giving them time to reflect, giving them time to think through these concepts, giving them time to practice on kind of moral dilemmas that they face in their life, and hypothetically think through what they might do in there, giving them time to think through great narratives from the past or from the present or from friends or from well-known people, and see the character implications within those sorts of stories. So this may be seen as more kind of explicit character education, but it's still not trying to tell kids what to do. It's trying to give them, provide environments that they come to some of this stuff themselves.
Brilliant. I love that answer so much, because it's so easy just to think, oh yeah, I'll tell them not to do this and then that's it, full stop, or tell them that it'd be really good for them if they were a good exemplar. But it's so much more complex than that. And I love the idea of the dip, so that you don't need to worry too much, if it isn't perfect. So your 14, 15-year-old isn't behaving, in the way that you really hope, or they're not showing the kind of character habits that you might really hope to see, but actually, to have faith to keep going. And I think it's such a error that we see in education, that we just, tell kids off and expect that you're not going to see that kind of behavior again, or you're not going to see that trait again, or you just put a load of rules in place and then they're never going to be broken, or they're just going to form habits for life of always doing kind of sitting within the rules, which would be quite unhealthy for society anyway. So I think that was a particularly exciting answer.
There's definitely a place for rules and punishment. I don't want to be, punishment in a soft set, kind of consequences, maybe a better word. That there is a place in that, in teaching, parenting, and all the rest of it. But as I keep coming back to, it's limited, and actually moving to approach, and I know a lot of schools are doing this, I think yours is as well, moving more to kind of character coaching. You don't have to call it character coaching, but kind of coaching, trying to look at what's going on in this, thinking about helping children kind of think through that, how did the situation occur, where did they actually get to. For certain children, it is going to have better longer term consequences for them, because they don't constantly have a negative feeling about themselves in all spaces, and the ones who's always getting things wrong or whatever. But they've also been given that chance to think through, let's try not to do this as repetitive behavior, but let's think what other options there are actually out there, and some hope through there. And it's complex, not everything works for all children all the time. It's very, as I keep coming back to, very human, very messy in a lot of ways. But I do think that kind of repeated kind of constantly kind of punishment and telling off, and likewise the opposite. There's big character educators in America like Marvin Berkowitz and others who'd be really against the opposite, which is too much rewarding in this space as well. If you're doing it all for extrinsic benefit, I'm guilty as anyone of sometimes offering my kids some sweets, or in the early days of money now, to get them to do those sorts of things. Sometimes we all do that, but there's got to be some limits around there, because if our children only want or do things for extrinsic reward, so either for kind of carrots or sticks, then I think that we're not really helping our children so much in that, kind of develop that inner wisdom that they need when they leave our schools and homes.
Oh, 100%. Thank you so much, Tom. We've just got a couple of minutes left. So would you be happy just to leave us with a couple of kind of top tips for really helping our young people to thrive?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. I think there's so many. I mean, I suppose a couple of things. One is I want us to not leave with the sense that a character-based approach is pushing this all back onto parents and teachers again, because really, and I should have said this at the start, and I tried to say this, caveat at the start of everything. So much responsibility relies with our tech companies themselves, and look at the massive debates going on Facebook right now, and whether they're being regulated properly or regulating themselves, and for our governments to allow us to have the space to allow this to actually happen. So putting this at the door of parents, teachers and children is saying, in the absence of that going on right now, and the very real fact that our children are dealing with this right now, we need to do something, and I hope a character-based approach will allow that to happen. And I offer out, my thoughts in the book and the research and other things as ideas that I hope will shape your own thinking. It's not a textbook, it's not a Bible that you can read through and just implement and everything will be fine. But it's the first book in this country, and I think anywhere actually, that really starts to talk through what a character-based approach would look like in this sort of space. So hopefully it will just open up some new thoughts of how we might go about these things.
Brilliant, Tom. Thank you so much. It's been amazing having this conversation with you, and really getting to unpick some of your amazing ideas in the book, and hopefully everyone's really enjoyed that and goes away with a sense of optimism, but also a kind of realism that it is deeply complex, it's hugely human, and also the centrality of relationships too. So really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Tom, and yeah, really look forward to continuing to follow your work.
Thank you very much.